She is a successful CEO of one of the most influential banking groups in the country. She decided to check the service in the branches incognito, without security, without a suit, without a name on the badge. In a branch located in a wealthy suburb, the manager refuses to give her money. Why? Because the amount is large and the documents are suspicious. He looks down at her. He scoffs. He does not know that she is the owner of this bank. Aaliyah Morgan's name had become synonymous with uncompromising excellence and innovation in the world of finance. As the CEO of one of the country's most influential banking groups, she had transformed a modest regional bank into a powerhouse that set standards across the industry. Yet, for all her achievements and accolades, few knew of the arduous journey that had forged her relentless spirit. Born to modest means and armed with an unyielding determination to rewrite the rules, Aaliyah was a living testament to the idea that vision, grit, and integrity could overcome every obstacle. From her early days as a young graduate working entry-level jobs in a small local bank, she had risen through the ranks, learning every nuance of customer service and corporate management along the way. Her passion for fairness and excellence became her trademark, and when she was unexpectedly promoted to lead the banking group, it was both a triumph and a challenge. For Aaliyah, success had never been about vanity. It was about ensuring that every customer, no matter how insignificant they might seem to the high-flying executives in city offices, was treated with respect and efficiency. Yet, as the years passed and the bank's empire expanded rapidly, a peculiar trend began to emerge within the branches. Even in the affluent suburban areas where state-of-the-art facilities and polished interiors were supposed to stand as symbols of trust and integrity, whispers of inconsistent service, of unruly attitudes, and of a disconnect between corporate values and daily practice occasionally reached her ears. For a woman who had spent countless days restructuring internal protocols and refining customer relations in boardrooms, such discrepancies were more than mere numbers in a report. They struck at the very heart of what her bank represented. It wasn't enough for her to rely on quarterly surveys and customer feedback forms. Aaliyah needed to know firsthand whether the golden standard she envisioned was truly being upheld on the ground. And so, with a rare spark of rebellious curiosity that belied her flawless reputation, Aaliyah decided to test the bank's service incognito. Determined to leave behind the reassuring armor of her tailored suits, sparkling accessories, and the omnipresent security that usually accompanied a CEO of her stature, she chose to blend in with the everyday clientele. Dressed in simple clothing, a modest blouse, comfortable jeans, and a pair of understated flats, she forewent her embossed ID badge and the trappings of corporate power. Today, without the weight of her title, she would experience the service, the attitudes, and even the prejudices that might lurk in one of her bank's suburban branches. Early one crisp morning, the city still yawning as it stirred awake, Aaliyah set off to the branch located in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods. As she stepped into the bank, the usual pristine ambience struck her immediately, but so did the subtle hints of exclusivity that permeated every corner. Soft classical music played over hidden speakers, modern art and sleek decor adorned the walls, and a discreet security desk observed every customer with a guarded professionalism. Yet, this is exactly what Aaliyah wanted to assess. How did the branch treat someone who did not belong to the upper echelons of the corporate world? How did a regular customer feel when entering these hallowed halls that were meant for financial empowerment? She approached the counter with a calm, steady gait, her visage unremarkable and free of the commanding look typically associated with Aaliyah Morgan. Upon noticing her arrival, the bank's staff exchanged quick, measured glances, whispers of curiosity that went unvoiced. A manager behind the counter, whose thinly veiled skepticism was almost palpable, greeted her curtly. "Good morning," he said in a tone that was both chilly and dismissive, as if she were an intruder rather than a valued customer. Aaliyah smiled slightly, her eyes betraying nothing, and announced her intention. She needed to withdraw a considerable sum of money. The request was nothing out of the ordinary for most clients, but today would be different. Before even glancing up at her documents, the manager's eyes narrowed as if calculating probabilities and risks. "I'm sorry," he said almost immediately, "but large sums like that require prior verification, and, well, your documents, They raised some red flags. His words were laced with condescending disbelief. "Are you sure you even have an account with us?" he added quietly, as if discussing a hypothetical error. For a moment, the manager's tone and dismissive manner were almost laughable, if not for the gravity they carried. To an unsuspecting customer, such treatment might have seemed reasonable, but to Aaliyah, it was a blow not only to her credibility as a leader but also to the very values she had painstakingly instilled in her organization. She gave no outward sign of indignation. Instead, she maintained a calm, impassive expression, all the while noting every minute detail of the encounter. A simple request followed by an unprovoked refusal. Her eyes silently recorded the manager's haughty demeanor and the subtle hints of bias in his words. In that brief exchange, where the air was thick with unspoken assumptions and impertinent arrogance, Aaliyah Morgan experienced firsthand the failure of a service that was meant to live up to the promise of excellence. It was a moment born not of malice but of ignorance, a failure of human rapport in a place where customer care should have been sovereign. And as the manager continued to cast resentful glances in her direction, Aaliyah realized that this incident was not an isolated lapse. Rather, it was the symptom of a deeper malaise, a disconnect between the meticulously designed policies at the top and their execution on the ground. This incognito visit had been meticulously planned. The very essence of the experiment was to peel back the layers of protocols and reveal a raw, unvarnished reality. Aaliyah wanted to see if the same humiliations whispered in confidential meetings and internal memos were etched into the day-to-day experiences of everyday customers. She took note of every detail. The way the manager's tone changed when he mentioned her documents and suspicious details, the curt responses from the tellers, and the overall atmosphere of aloofness that permeated the branch. The scene was set, and the consequences of subpar service began to unfold before her very eyes. And so, as she quietly collected her thoughts and mentally documented every interaction, the prickly demeanor, the unwarranted challenges to her identity, even the snarky, racially tinged remarks that escaped in half-whispered fragments, she decided it was time. Time would prove that the standard she demanded was not just a lofty ideal for boardrooms and annual reports, but a lived reality for every customer, regardless of their status or background. As Aaliyah left the branch that day without raising her voice or demanding a public apology, her calm final remark, something as innocuous as, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding. Please confirm your name," echoed the silent judgment against the man who had treated her so disdainfully. In her mind, she had noted down every detail, every slight, every unwarranted sneer, and made plans to address these systemic flaws from the very top. And little did the branch manager know that his haughty words and dismissive actions would soon trigger events that he could never have foreseen. Aaliyah stepped into the quiet, elegantly appointed branch located in one of the wealthiest suburbs of the city. Dressed in plain attire, a simple blouse paired with jeans and discreet flats, she aimed to blend into the everyday clientele. As she entered, a subtle murmur passed among the staff. The receptionist, barely glancing up from the computer screen, offered a curt nod and quietly advised, "Please do not sit here." Her words were vague, as if implying that this branch wasn't meant for someone with her appearance. Aaliyah's heart remained steady. This was all part of the incognito experiment meant to uncover any shortcomings in the branch's customer service. She approached the main counter with a calm, measured stride. Behind the polished glass, a middle-aged manager with an air of superiority and a finely chiseled frown regarded her from his seat with thinly veiled disdain. Without even asking for her name or waiting for her documents, he leaned forward as if to dispel a bothersome thought. "Excuse me," he began in a tone too brisk for a simple inquiry. "But large sums are not typically disbursed without proper verification." His gaze flicked over her as he continued, "Especially with a request like yours." The words were delivered with an underlying hint that she did not quite belong. Aaliyah's voice was steady as she stated her purpose. She wanted to withdraw a significant amount of cash, a transaction that, on any ordinary day, would simply require a few formalities. Yet before she could even produce the necessary paperwork, the manager interjected, "I'm sorry, but these transactions require more than just a request. Your documents appear questionable." His eyes narrowed, and his tone grew colder. "Are you sure you even have an account with us?" he asked, his words laced with incredulity. The implication was clear. In his estimation, she was not a typical client of this high-end branch. Every syllable of his insinuation struck Aaliyah like a calculated jab. She had come to evaluate the branch's adherence to fairness and professionalism. Instead, she was met with condescension, suspicion, and even an undertone of prejudice. The manager's body language was all the proof she needed. A dismissive tilt of his head, a slight sneer curling his lips as he regarded her plain clothes, and a hasty slide into bureaucratic rigidity before even looking at the documents she slowly retrieved from her bag. His eyes scanned her features critically as if by doing so he could determine her legitimacy simply by appearance. "I assure you," Aaliyah replied calmly, her tone devoid of emotion despite the situation, "I have all the proper paperwork with me. I understand the security procedures." But before she could finish her sentence, the manager cut her off with a sarcastic chuckle. "You see, madam, our policy is quite clear. Large amounts are not dispensed without a rigorous verification process. And frankly, with a name like yours—" He paused, as though savoring the moment of patronizing condescension. "It just raises our suspicions. Do you even hold an account here?" His words echoed in the quiet space between them, a sharp reminder of the unnecessary barriers that some clients might face simply because of their appearance or, perhaps, their background. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Aaliyah did not flinch. Instead, her eyes remained fixed, studying the manager's haughty expression, as if she were silently taking note of every micro-expression and dismissive gesture. She was acutely aware that this behavior was not an isolated incident, but a manifestation of systemic issues that needed to be addressed. Even as the manager continued to murmur about verification protocols and the proper level of scrutiny required for such transactions, Aaliyah meticulously registered every detail. She noted his tone, the way his eyes darted around to ensure no one was watching too closely, and the subtle smirk that played on his lips when he questioned, "Are you sure you even have an account with us?" Without a trace of overt emotion, Aaliyah reached slowly into her bag and produced the official document she had been carrying. Not her CEO credentials, but a standard withdrawal form accompanied by basic identification. She set the papers on the counter with a deliberate calm, inviting him to inspect them properly. Yet, even then, the manager seemed to dismiss the authenticity of her documents without a thorough review. His eyes landed on the date and then, almost reflexively, he frowned before hissing quietly beneath his breath, "These don't look right. They seem off, almost fabricated." His words, laden with unspoken judgment, were intended to belittle both her and the validity of her account. It wasn't lost on Aaliyah that the manager's disingenuous skepticism bordered on arrogance. She stood there silently, every fiber of her being recording the scene. The look of disdain, the deliberate delay, and that sly, racist-tinged remark that slipped out as if he were discussing an inconvenient truth. Large sums, especially from accounts with names like this, require extra checks. It was a statement made in a hushed tone, presumed never to be overheard by anyone else. Within those tense minutes, the second hand ticking steadily in the background while he continued his condescending interrogation, Aaliyah's resolve only hardened further. With every passing second, she detailed the encounter in her mind, her quiet observations crafting a report that would later serve to overhaul training and service protocols across her banking group. While she maintained an outward expression of calm indifference, inside she was exactly noting the nuances of the manager's behavior, preparing to confront the systemic lapse that he epitomized. As the exchange reached its uneasy conclusion, Aaliyah's face remained as composed as ever. The irate manager, still clutching the excuse of suspicious documents and verification protocols, finally motioned for her to step aside. With a final scoff and a dismissive, "You must have mistaken the branch." He turned his attention away, leaving her with her unanswered request, and an indelible mark of disrespect that would soon demand accountability. Aaliyah remained seated at the counter, her posture an expression of quiet dignity, even as the manager's words began to stray dangerously into condescension and subtle hostility. As she presented her neatly organized documents for a significant cash withdrawal, the manager's gaze became increasingly dismissive. His eyes darted over the papers as if they might betray her identity before she could even say another word. With a sneer curling at the corner of his mouth, he said in a raised, almost rehearsed tone, "Madam, as I mentioned, large transactions like these aren't processed without thorough verification. And, frankly, your documents seem off." The word off hung in the air, a dismissal that was meant to sound technical but smacked of prejudice. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing an insider secret with the bank's usual clientele. "You see, here at this branch, we have protocols that are particularly strict with accounts that show unusual patterns. I must ask, are you absolutely certain you even hold an active account with us? I have seen instances where individuals, especially those with names that don't quite match our records, attempt to withdraw funds under dubious pretenses." His tone suggested that her identity and, more pointedly, her perceived background had already been judged even before any proper check was made. The manager's eyes narrowed, scanning Aaliyah's face as if deciphering a code written in subtle features rather than the official documents displayed before him. The implication was clear. She didn't quite fit the image of the esteemed clientele they preferred to serve. "It's rather uncommon," he continued coolly, "for an account under a surname like yours to have such a high balance without some prior notice or additional documentation. I must insist that you provide further proof of your account's legitimacy." His words, wrapped in bureaucratic jargon, masked the disdain beneath, a disdain that referred, with a barely concealed edge, to her race and social background. Aaliyah kept her eyes trained on his, her expression imperturbable despite the sting of his insinuations. Every word he uttered was measured to undermine her credibility. "Excuse me," she interjected calmly. "I assure you that all of my documentation is in order. I have been a client of this bank for over a decade, and these papers reflect exactly what is on record." Yet her assurance was met with a dismissive scoff. "I'm sorry, but our system flags high-value transactions for extra scrutiny, especially when the documentation appears irregular," he replied, his voice laden with incredulity. He paused as if waiting for her to protest, then added in a low, almost conspiratorial tone, "With a name like yours, one has to wonder if there's been some mistake. It almost sounds as though you might be using forged credentials." There was a nasty bite in his voice that suggested he was amused by the very idea that someone like her could even be in his branch requesting a withdrawal of such magnitude. The remarks grew even more cutting when he leaned in closer, his eyes glittering with a mix of arrogance and thinly veiled contempt. "Really, madam, in this establishment, we pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards of security, and for an ordinary client, the rules are applied uniformly. However, when large sums are involved, and when the paperwork doesn't check out immediately, I must be extra cautious. I hope you understand that it's for the security of all our customers," he said, his tone mocking and patronizing. Each word was intended to demean her, to reduce her not to a valued customer but to an unwelcome anomaly in his meticulously ordered world. Even as the quiet hum of the branch's background buzz persisted, the clink of coins in the teller's drawers, the muted murmur of other customers discussing their finances, the manager's derisive comments seemed to echo in the sterile air. He glanced around at his colleagues, casting furtive, self-satisfied looks as if sharing a secret jibe that no one else needed to hear. "I wonder," he mused audibly, "if you even have a proper account. It's rare to see someone with this kind of name requesting such a large sum without a prior appointment." His voice carried an assumption of superiority, as though he and his colleagues were guardians of a privileged order that she had audaciously intruded upon. Aaliyah listened, her silence a testament to the years of resilience that had carried her through challenges far greater than this. Inside, however, every dismissive remark and every sneer was logged with meticulous precision. She noted the manager's specific phrasing and the condescending tilt of his head, as well as the fleeting but unmistakable tone of derision when he mentioned names like yours. It was a moment that, though couched in the language of financial security protocols, reeked of prejudice, a prejudice that, Given her background and quiet battles fought in boardrooms at the highest level of banking, she knew all too well. As the uncomfortable minutes wore on and the manager continued to enumerate supposed discrepancies in her documentation, Aaliyah maintained her composure perfectly. In a final act of quiet defiance, she locked her gaze with his and, without raising her voice, calmly but firmly stated, "I would appreciate it if you could process my transaction without further delay. I am certain that a review of my records will confirm my status." Her tone was devoid of any overt anger. Instead, it was laced with an assurance born of years of experience in overcoming adversity. But the manager's response was swift and final. With a huff of disbelief and a dismissive wave of his hand, he retorted, "I'm sorry, but until we receive additional verifications, which, given your documents, I doubt will be forthcoming, I cannot authorize this withdrawal." In that moment, his authority was absolute. His decision not a matter open for debate. The branch's system and the weight of his own prejudices had conspired to deny her service without a fair review. The stark humiliation of that encounter, punctuated by his calculated racial undertones and the casual cruelty of his dismissal, left an indelible mark on Aaliyah. She made no scene. Instead, she noted down every detail, each phrase, each sneer, for the record. With composed dignity, she retrieved her documents, thanked him quietly for his time, and rose from the counter. The manager's last words as she left, "You must have mistaken the branch, madam," echoed behind her like a final, bitter note of arrogance. It was a reminder that even in the most prestigious institutions, the gaps between intent and execution could be vast, and that sometimes the true test of a leader's commitment to excellence lay in correcting the failures of those who dared to serve beneath them. Aaliyah remained impeccably composed even as the degrading remarks echoed in the sterile air of the branch. The manager's dismissive tone and offhand insinuations, implying that her documents were questionable and that her very name raised suspicions, could have easily triggered an outburst. Instead, Aaliyah, seasoned both in boardroom battles and in overcoming subtle biases throughout her ascent, kept her expression utterly neutral. She maintained the dignified calm of a CEO who had faced far graver challenges than this petty display of arrogance. Without a trace of visible indignation, she slowly reached into the inner pocket of her plain jacket, retrieving a slim leather-bound notebook, a discreet tool she always carried during her incognito visits. As the manager droned on about verification protocols and the improbability of her having a legitimately high balance with such a name, Aaliyah scanned the room with quiet calculation. Every moment was a data point, every sneer and offhand comment logged meticulously in her mind. With subtle precision, she scribbled down the manager's name and badge number on a fresh page in her notebook. The act was quick and almost imperceptible, a silver pen gliding silently over paper as she recorded details. The manager's full name, his position, and even the curt phrases he had carelessly echoed like suspicious documents and unusual account activity. She did not raise her voice to demand explanation or to correct his presumptions. Instead, her measured eyes and calm posture conveyed a quiet defiance, a refusal to allow his condescension to disturb her inner resolve. While the manager continued to prattle on about protocol, Aaliyah's thoughts turned inward. She recalled the very core of the banking values she had built over the years: integrity, accountability, and respect for every client. It pained her to see that these ideals were being compromised at the local level by individuals whose arrogance cloaked discriminatory assumptions. Yet, even as a flicker of disappointment passed across her eyes, she chose to channel that emotion into the sharp focus of a corrective plan. After a few more strained minutes passing like an eternity in that sterile waiting area, Aaliyah's calm silence became the final rebuttal. She closed her notebook softly, as if sealing away the evidence of this misstep in service. With the quiet dignity that had defined her entire career, she placed the very same documents back into her bag, leaving no trace of the internal turmoil the encounter could have awakened. Without a word, she turned to face the counter one last time, her face an unreadable mask of serene determination. "Thank you," she said in a soft, measured tone, the words floating like a gentle farewell rather than a reprimand. There was no scolding or confrontation, There was only the unmistakable air of a person who knew her worth and, more importantly, knew that the institution she helmed would not tolerate such unprofessionalism for long. The manager's eyes, still narrowed in a petty display of superiority, flickered briefly as if trying to decipher the layered meaning behind her courteous parting words. But Aaliyah did not wait for his response. She turned and walked towards the exit, her steps measured and deliberate. The corridor, with its polished tiles and well-lit recesses, seemed to stretch out before her like a runway, one that reminded her that every step she took was a step towards preserving the integrity of the bank and the trust of its customers. Outside, the soft murmur of suburban life mingled with the quiet determination in her stride. Each step away from the branch was both literal and symbolic, a farewell to an environment that had betrayed the very standards she had fought so hard to establish. Before disappearing through the front doors, Aaliyah cast a final glance back toward the counter. The manager was now buried in his work, oblivious to the fact that his behavior would soon spark a transformation far beyond what he could imagine. In that fleeting moment, Aaliyah's eyes held neither anger nor vindictiveness, only the cool resolve of a leader committed to excellence, who knew that every failure in service was an opportunity to drive systemic change. Once outside, in the crisp morning air, she paused for a moment to breathe deeply, gathering her thoughts and solidifying her plan. In her mind, the details she had recorded would be the first step toward an internal investigation that would ensure no other customer would ever be subjected to the condescending and discriminatory service she had just endured. This was not merely a personal affront. It was a systemic lapse that betrayed the bank's own values of honesty, integrity, and fairness. With a final, determined glance at the building, the branch that had unwittingly become a stage for injustice, Aaliyah set off. The straightforward exit of the branch was not an act of retreat, but a calm preparation for the next phase. Her incognito mission had revealed a flaw that she intended to correct swiftly from the very top. The evidence in her notebook would soon be escalated to the highest executives, and today she would initiate the corrective measures that were long overdue. In her capacity not only as a CEO but as an unwavering custodian of customer trust, Aaliyah Morgan was already drafting the measures that would ensure that the values of respect and excellence were restored throughout every branch of her banking group. Once Aaliyah had stepped out of the branch, her measured silence still echoing in the sterile corridors of that upscale suburban bank, the manager, Mr. Reginald Childs, returned to his cramped staff break room with a self-satisfied swagger. The pristine marble and gleaming glass of the main lobby now gave way to a more confining space, where tired fluorescent lights hung overhead and a well-worn coffee machine provided a fleeting moment of camaraderie among staff. It was here that Reginald, still flushed with triumph at what he believed was another case of an impudent fraudster trying to game the system, couldn't resist recounting the incident to a small group of colleagues. Leaning casually against a counter laden with mismatched mugs, he smirked as he launched into his tale. "You should have seen her, ladies and gents," he began, his voice laced with amusement. "This woman waltzed in here, dressed all plain as if she were just another regular. But when she asked to withdraw a very large sum of money, yes, a sum that should have raised every single red flag on our system, she was immediately met with some standard verification protocols." His tone was light and mocking, and he punctuated his words with a dismissive wave of his hand as if swatting away an insect. A junior teller, glancing up from her lukewarm cup of coffee, whispered, "What exactly did she say?" Intrigued by Reginald's performance, one of his colleagues leaned in closer. Reginald chuckled lowly and went on, "Before I even bothered to glance at her documents. I mean, who even cares about those fancy papers when it's obvious from the get-go? I told her that large transactions aren't processed without a strict prior check. And you know what? I didn't even open her file. I said, large sums are not dispensed without a proper check, especially with names like that. And she just stammered something about her documents being in order, as if she really believed she had an account here." He paused, surveying the group with a self-assured grin. I could practically see her flounder, a mixture of confusion and indignation on her face. It was as though she thought she was in the right. But in my branch, not on my watch. His eyes glittered with amusement and, perhaps, an unhealthy sense of superiority. There was a murmur of agreement among his colleagues, a nod here and a sympathetic smirk there. One of them, a seasoned teller with lines mapping years of service, remarked, "That's our standard procedure. We have to be extra vigilant." Reginald's lips curled in satisfaction, as though every word confirmed his position as the guardian of protocol. "But," he continued, his tone shifting as though drawing a dramatic pause for effect, "what really tickled me was when she tried to insist that she was here to withdraw money from her very own account. I had to ask her, quite rudely I might add, 'Do you even have an account with us?' As if it were a matter of simple arithmetic. And of course, she couldn't provide any convincing evidence in a hurry." His laughter was soft at first but escalated into a self-indulgent chortle that filled the break room. "I mean, where do people even come up with such audacity?" While his colleagues burst into a blend of chuckles and approving snickers, one of the newer staff members hesitated. "But Reginald, shouldn't we be careful about how we handle these matters? I mean, isn't it our job to serve every customer even if they seem different?" The comment hung awkwardly in the air, and Reginald's smile faltered ever so slightly. Yet, with practiced ease, he waved off the concern. "Oh, don't be naive," he replied with a sneer. "This isn't some charity. We're dealing with large sums here. And frankly, when someone with documents that look, well, questionable tries to process such a request, we have to protect the bank. That's our duty." He leaned back, satisfied with his own logic, and took a sip from his coffee. Little did Reginald know that his merry boasting was about to encounter a severe, unforeseen twist. As he was settling into his comfortable narrative, his office phone began to ring, its shrill tone cutting through the casual banter like a knife. With a slight frown and the habitual annoyance of an interruption, Reginald excused himself from the group to answer the call. In the isolation of his slightly cramped desk, he answered briskly. On the other end of the line, a voice with an authoritative tone from the head office said, "Reginald, please report immediately to the head branch office. There is an urgent matter concerning your recent handling of a withdrawal request." The voice was firm, bordering on reprimand, something Reginald wasn't accustomed to hearing, especially not after such a confident display of his own protocol enforcement. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of concern quickly masked by his habitual professionalism. "Understood. I'll be there in 5 minutes," he responded before ending the call and returning to the break room. As he rejoined his colleagues, the room's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. The light-hearted amusement waned, and a new tension took root in the air. The staff exchanged uneasy glances as Reginald's earlier confident chortles gave way to a pensive silence. Even the junior teller, who had been quietly skeptical, noted that something was amiss. Reginald's mind raced, not with the satisfaction of catching a fraudster, but with a faint, disquieting awareness of impending consequences. Was it possible that his cavalier handling of the matter would now be called into question by someone higher up? The murmurs in the room grew louder as reality began to set in. What had started as a moment of self-indulgent boasting was about to spiral into something far graver than he had anticipated. The once celebratory tone of his colleagues was now tempered by apprehension, and as he straightened his tie and adjusted his posture, Reginald realized that his actions might have been interpreted not only as rigorous security measures but as an unwarranted abuse of authority. The irony was pungent. Here he was, convinced of his moral and procedural superiority, only to face an abrupt summons that hinted at a reckoning from above. The break room door closed behind him as he walked briskly toward the exit, leaving behind echoes of whispers and uncertain stares. In that moment, the manager who had so confidently ridiculed a customer now had to confront the possibility that his missteps could cost him dearly. He had no inkling that his next destination, the head branch office, would unveil more than just the consequences of his own folly. It was a moment that would not only challenge his standing with his superiors but would also begin to rewrite the rules of how respect and professionalism were enforced in the very institution he thought he controlled. The phone call had come as an unwelcome interruption to Reginald Child's self-indulgent boasting. A shrill, authoritative ring that shattered the mirth of his break room camaraderie and replaced it with an icy foreboding. In the cramped solitude of his office, where he had reveled in his own self-importance just moments before, Reginald's confident smile faltered. The stern voice on the other end of the line from the head office was unmistakable in its command. "Reginald, report immediately to the head branch office. We have a matter of utmost urgency regarding your handling of a withdrawal request. You are to join us forthwith." For someone who prided himself on unyielding authority and adherence to protocol, however rudimentary his personal interpretation of it, these words stung like an accusation. His mind raced with a mix of indignation and anxiety as he recalled the details he had so carelessly boasted about only minutes before. In that moment, the lively chatter and approving nods from his colleagues in the break room were replaced by a heavy silence of uncertain consequence. Without a word, Reginald straightened his posture, checked his reflection in the darkened pane of his office door. His meticulously groomed hair now slightly tousled by the rapid pounding of his heart, and stormed out of the branch. Every step he took along the polished corridors of the suburban outlet became a countdown, both in his head and in the measured ticking of the clock. The once familiar hallway, lined with tasteful artwork and muted corporate slogans, now seemed like a gauntlet through which he had to march, his every footfall echoing the impending reckoning. The ride to the head branch office was surreal. In an expensively appointed sedan, as the city's affluent suburbs blurred past, Reginald was alone with his simmering thoughts. He ruminated over his earlier words, the very phrases he had uttered with a smug certainty that now looped endlessly in his mind. His inner dialogue was a cacophony of rationalizations and reluctant doubts. Had he overstepped? Had his arrogance, masquerading as strict adherence to policies, betrayed a prejudice that undermined the very values his bank professed to uphold? These thoughts battled with his ingrained pride, but the call from headquarters left little room for retreat. Upon arrival, the imposing facade of the head branch office loomed before him, a modern structure of glass, chrome, and understated elegance that spoke of a different order altogether. The entrance was guarded by attentive security officers who gave him curt nods as he passed through. Reginald's steps quickened as he approached the reception area. A sense of dread now mingled with the residual spark of his former bravado. Every polished surface, every meticulously arranged bouquet in the foyer, seemed to mark a stark contrast to the disarray of emotions swirling within him. After a brief wait in a quietly furnished lobby, he was led via a sleek corridor to a spacious executive meeting room. The air in that room was different from the stifling atmosphere back at his branch, a mix of refined authority and quiet expectation. And there, seated at a minimalist desk behind a robust, dark wood table, was Aaliyah Morgan. Even in her simple attire, plain blouse, dark trousers, minimal makeup, she radiated a power and dignity that commanded the room far more than any tailored suit or ornate accessory ever could. Her eyes, cool and steady, held him in place as if she were the arbiter of his fate. Aaliyah did not rise to greet him. Instead, with an air of serene inevitability, she laid a sealed envelope on the desk before him. There was no need for flowery introductions or excessive formality. The silence between them was thick with the unspoken weight of what was to come. Reginald, whose earlier arrogance seemed to shrink in the presence of such unyielding resolve, hesitated for a breathless moment before his eyes fell upon the envelope. It was embossed with the same official insignia that graced every document issued by the banking group, but its contents were anything but routine. "Ms. Morgan," Reginald began, his voice faltering as he searched her face for any trace of leniency. I was informed that there is an urgent matter regarding my conduct today." His tone, which had once dripped with condescension, now wavered with apprehension. Aaliyah's response was succinct and devoid of extraneous emotion. "Reginald Childs," she said, her voice as firm as granite yet uncolored by anger. "Your handling of that withdrawal request was not only inconsistent with our procedures, but also indicative of a bias that undermines the integrity of our institution." Her words hung in the air, each syllable measured, each word a quiet verdict. Reginald's mind raced. He tried to muster some justification, to revive his scripted recitation of standard protocols. But there was no bridge between his rehearsed excuses and the clear resolve in Aaliyah's eyes. She continued, Over the past several minutes, you have recorded your own version of events in a way that contradicts the very principles upon which this bank stands. It is with regret that I must inform you that your services are no longer required. There was a palpable stillness in the room, a silence that absorbed even Reginald's attempted rebuttals. The envelope, lying ominously on the desk, was his termination letter, a final severance from a bank whose ideals he had so arrogantly betrayed. The magnitude of the moment, the collapse of his comfortable vantage point, the shattering of his meticulously constructed authority, felt like an avalanche. For a man who had prided himself on being the last bulwark against fraud and error, his own fall from grace was now unfolding in real time before the very person he had long believed was beneath his notice. Unable to muster any retort or a semblance of defense, Reginald took a trembling breath and reached out with a rigid hand. His fingers brushed over the envelope's surface as if seeking some reassurance that this was, in fact, real. Aaliyah's gaze remained unwavering, her eyes reflecting not triumph but a solemn dedication to the core values of respect and accountability. "I regret that you have allowed your personal prejudices to cloud your judgment," Aaliyah stated quietly. "You have not only disrespected a client but compromised the trust our customers place in us, and, by extension, the entire ethical foundation of this bank." The words, delivered in such a controlled tone, punctured the last remnants of Reginald's defiance. His posture slumped imperceptibly, the rigid arrogance that had defined him now dissolving into muted despair. The termination letter was not just an end. It represented a call for change, a moment when the irresponsible abuse of power was met with decisive, unwavering accountability. As silence settled once more, Reginald could only watch, stunned, as Aaliyah gathered the terminated records and accompanied them with swift, determined notes to the board. In that tense, unforgettable confrontation, the manager who had once looked down on an incognito customer now stood, ashamed and diminished, as his own fate was sealed by the very system he had once manipulated. The boardroom was filled with a charged silence as Aaliyah Morgan stepped forward into the center. The room, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows, rich wooden accents, and a long, gleaming conference table, was now the stage for a speech that would echo far beyond its walls. Today, every manager, supervisor, and team leader present understood that the atmosphere of complacency and unchecked arrogance had finally met its reckoning. Aaliyah, in her plain attire that belied the formidable power she wielded as CEO, looked directly at every person in the room. Her eyes were calm and unwavering, each reflecting the weight of the lessons learned this morning in that suburban branch. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and resonant, carrying not the shrill edge of retribution but the steady cadence of decisive change. "This afternoon, I stand before you as the guardian of our bank's highest values: integrity, respect, and fairness. Our mission is not simply to amass wealth or to excel in the marketplace by any means necessary. It is to ensure that every single individual, whether a client or an employee, is treated with dignity and given the courtesy they deserve." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The room was silent as each manager absorbed the truth of her message. Aaliyah continued, "Earlier today, during a routine interaction at one of our branches, I witnessed a scene that not only exasperates me but also exemplifies exactly what we must never become. I went incognito to assess the quality of service in our branches, to speak directly to our customers' experiences without the interference of status or protocol. In one branch, a manager, someone entrusted with upholding our reputation, displayed behavior that fell woefully short of our standards. He refused service not because our procedures demanded it, but because he doubted the legitimacy of the applicant through misguided assumptions, and, I fear, even condescending remarks influenced by bias and prejudice." Her eyes swept across the room, challenging each person to reflect on their own conduct. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said. "In this institution, respect is not earned by wearing a tailored suit or by following a rigid script. Respect is shown in the way you treat every person who walks through our doors, whether they are high-net-worth individuals or a regular customer coming in for their day-to-day banking needs. Our clients place their trust in us, and it is our duty to protect that trust from being tainted by discrimination, by disrespect, or by arrogance. We are here to serve, and every member of our team must recognize that their first responsibility is to the dignity of the individual. Aaliyah's tone softened for a moment as she recounted the details of the day in a measured, factual manner. I received reports about a transaction inquiry that was handled not as a routine process but with an air of contempt. The manager in question not only dismissed the customer's request without proper verification but also made remarks that implied the customer's very identity was unworthy of our service. I recorded every detail. I have the names, the documented times, and the specifics of the conversation. I share this not to shame as individuals but to underline the reality that our current procedures have, in some instances, allowed personal prejudice to cloud professional judgment. There was a murmur among the attendees, a mix of discomfort and understanding, and Aaliyah pressed on with unwavering conviction. Effective immediately, the following measures will be enacted. All branch staff will undergo a comprehensive retraining program focusing on cultural competency, customer service excellence, and anti-discrimination practices. Every client interaction will be audited, and a new, anonymous feedback system will be instituted so that any incident of disrespect or bias can be reported and acted upon swiftly. The rules that govern our service are immutable. They belong to the institution, not to the individual biases of any one employee. If anyone here feels that they deserve the latitude to treat our customers as inferiors, I will remind you that the moment you forget that our strength lies in the trust of the people we serve, you jeopardize not just your position, but the very future of this bank. Aaliyah's gaze was piercing as she laid out the moral imperative. Imagine for a moment that the roles were reversed. Imagine you were the customer, seeking not only service but genuine recognition of your value. Would you wish to be met with condescension, dismissive glances, or unprovoked skepticism? I stand before you today as an advocate for every individual who has ever felt diminished by the very institution meant to empower them. I refuse to accept a culture where someone's appearance or presumed background determines the quality of service they receive. Here today, I redefine what it means to be a leader in our industry. I redefine respect, reminding us all that a true leader's power is measured by the dignity they bestow on others. She paused again, the moment heavy with sincerity. I did not come here to cast blame. I came here to set a new course. My encounter today was not an isolated incident. It is symptomatic of a gap between our corporate ideals and our branch-level execution. As your CEO and as someone who believes deeply in fairness and excellence, I am determined to close that gap. No longer will anyone be treated as if they are an anomaly because of their name, their appearance, or any aspect of their identity. The door remains open for redemption, for growth, and for understanding. And let me be unequivocally clear. Those who cannot meet the standard of service we uphold will not have a place in this institution. Drawing in a steady breath, Aaliyah concluded with quiet yet profound authority. I choose to believe that every person in this room has the capacity to learn, to change, and to grow into the kind of professionals who elevate our bank to its rightful status as a beacon of integrity. Remember this, true respect is not measured by power or only those who wear suits. It is about the conduct of your heart, the integrity of your actions, and the genuine care you extend to every client. Today, we start anew. Today, we pledge that from this moment on, dignity will light our path, discrimination will find no shelter within these walls, and every rule will be bound by the spirit of fairness and humanity. A pause stretched as her words sank in, and then, in a tone that blended solemnity with hope, she added, "He once saw in me nothing more than a nameless stranger, while I saw in him someone who had lost his way in our company, a person without a future in this culture of respect. Let that be a lesson for us all. We will not tolerate any behavior that diminishes our values. We are more than our titles. We are the stewards of trust. And now, I ask each one of you, let's be the change that guarantees our clients are met with true respect every single time." A hush fell over the room. Slowly, heads nodded in agreement and resolve shone in many eyes. In that moment, a new standard had been set. A promise that the bank would, from this day forward, embody the integrity, respect, and humanity that Aaliyah Morgan cherished. The era of superficial service was over. The future, forged in the fires of accountability and compassion, had just begun. Subscribe if you believe that respect is not about wearing a fancy suit, but about the sincere attitude you show towards every person you encounter.